She told me I was always around. I told her it's because she wanted me to be, but neither of us was ready for what those words would awaken. I never thought much about how often I saw her until she pointed it out. She was my neighbor, the kind of woman who carried herself with an elegance that made her stand out without even trying. Early 40s, sharp in her confidence, but softened by something I couldn't quite name, maybe the quiet way her eyes lingered when she thought no one was watching. Her house was only a few steps away from mine, and somehow, without planning it, our paths kept crossing. Some evenings it was as simple as me holding the gate for her as she came home from work. Other days I'd notice her at the grocery store, struggling with more bags than one person should carry. I'd step in to help, and she'd give me this half-smile, grateful but guarded, like she didn't want to depend on anyone, but she wasn't going to push me away either. That afternoon, the air was warm, almost golden, the kind of light that made everything look softer. I was outside, pretending to fix something on my porch, when she walked past, her hair catching the sun in a way that made me stop for a moment longer than I should have. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. That's part of what made her different. She had this sharp awareness, like she could read the smallest hesitation in people. She glanced at me and said, with a playful tone that didn't quite mask the truth underneath, "You're always around." I could have laughed it off, made some casual excuse. But the words slipped out before I had time to second-guess them. "Because you want me to be." Her steps faltered. She turned slightly, her eyes narrowing just a little, caught between amusement and something else, something deeper. I felt the weight of the silence between us, heavy and electric, like I'd touched on something I wasn't supposed to name. She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head, but I caught the way her lips pressed together afterward, as if she was holding back a question she wasn't ready to ask. I tried to keep my expression steady, casual, but inside, I was replaying the moment on a loop. Had I crossed a line? Or had I finally said the thing we'd both been circling around without ever admitting? I offered to carry the bag she had in her hand, and after the briefest pause, she let me. Her fingers brushed mine as she passed it over, and the touch, barely there, fleeting, sent a warmth through me that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. We walked together to her front step, the air filled with simple sounds, the creak of wood underfoot, the hum of distant traffic, the faint rustle of leaves. It should have felt ordinary, but nothing about it did. The closeness was charged, not with words or gestures, but with everything we weren't saying. When I handed the bag back to her, she gave me that small smile again, softer this time, less guarded. For a second, I thought she might say something more, but instead, she just lingered there, standing in the doorway with the sun behind her. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself before. It wasn't just coincidence that kept me nearby. I wanted to be around her. And whether she knew it or not, she wanted me there too. The thing about being near her was that silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. Like the pauses between our words carried more weight than the words themselves. That evening, I saw her struggling with a box at the back of her car. It looked heavier than she could manage, though she didn't complain. She never did. She was the kind of woman who would fight with something stubborn, whether it was a jar lid or her own thoughts, before admitting she needed help. I walked over before she could refuse me. "Let me," I said, reaching for the box. She hesitated, eyes flicking up to mine, as if deciding whether she should let me. For a moment she held on, her fingers brushing against mine, and that simple touch felt like it lasted longer than it should have. Finally she let go, letting me take the weight. Carrying it inside wasn't the hard part. The hard part was the quiet that followed when I set it down in her hallway. She stood close enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, mixed with the scent of polished wood and something faintly floral drifting from another room. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady but her eyes shifting, almost avoiding mine. I nodded, though I wanted to say more. I wanted to ask why she always seemed careful with me, like she was holding something back. Instead, I just stood there for a moment, realizing how small the space felt when she was this close. She moved past me, her shoulder brushing lightly against my arm as she reached for the box. It wasn't intentional. I don't think it was. But the contact sent a pulse through me that I couldn't ignore. My chest tightened, and I caught myself holding my breath, afraid she might notice how much it affected me. I told myself not to read into it, not to mistake kindness for something more. But then there were her eyes, how they lingered for a second longer than necessary before pulling away. How her lips pressed together as if she had words she refused to let out. I leaned against the doorframe, trying to look casual. She busied herself with opening the box, avoiding the way I was watching her. The silence stretched again, filled with the sound of crinkling tape and cardboard tearing. And beneath it, that invisible current between us hummed louder than any words could. I finally broke it, just to release the pressure. "You really shouldn't carry things like that alone," I said. Her laugh was soft, almost embarrassed. "I'm used to it." There was more behind those words. Years of doing things for herself, years of refusing to depend on anyone. And for some reason that made me want to be there even more. When I finally turned to leave, she followed me to the door. We stood there for a second, not saying anything, just letting the moment linger. Her hand rested lightly on the frame, and mine brushed it as I stepped past her. Again, too brief to mean anything, yet somehow it meant everything. I glanced back before I walked away, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Her eyes held mine, steady, questioning, until I finally forced myself to turn. The pull between us wasn't something I imagined anymore. It was there, undeniable, waiting for whichever one of us would be brave enough to admit it first. The rain always seemed to arrive when no one expected it. That evening, the sky had been clear, the air heavy with the scent of summer heat, and then suddenly, the clouds broke. A quick, heavy downpour rushed over the street, turning the pavement slick and shining under the dim streetlights. I saw her from my porch, fumbling with an umbrella that refused to cooperate. She tilted it one way, then another, but the wind caught it and nearly flipped it inside out. She laughed softly to herself, a sound I barely caught over the rain, and for some reason, it made her look younger in that moment, like she wasn't trying so hard to hold everything together. Without thinking twice, I jogged down the steps and crossed the street, the rain soaking into my shirt almost immediately. She looked up as I reached her, strands of wet hair clinging to her cheek. "Here," I said, taking the umbrella gently from her hands. My fingers brushed hers, cool from the rain, and I steadied the handle above us both. The space under the umbrella was small, forcing us close. Her arm brushed mine, her shoulder nearly pressing against me as we walked toward her door. The rain drummed steadily above us, a cocoon of sound that seemed to separate us from the rest of the world. By the time we reached her porch, both of us were damp, laughing quietly at the futility of staying dry. She pushed her wet hair back from her face, her fingers lingering at her temple, and then looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, half amusement, half something heavier. "Come inside," she said. "At least until the rain slows." I hesitated only long enough to remind myself that stepping inside wasn't unusual. Neighbors shared tea. Neighbors didn't overthink things. But my pulse quickened anyway as I followed her in. The air inside was warm, carrying the faint scent of wood polish and something floral, maybe from the candle flickering faintly on the table. She moved gracefully through the small living room, though I noticed the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, an unconscious gesture that betrayed a touch of nerves. "Tea?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost tentative. I nodded, settling into a chair while she moved into the kitchen. I listened to the gentle clink of cups, the soft rush of water, the quiet rhythm of her presence in the next room. It was ordinary, yet I felt more aware of every sound, every movement than I had in a long time. When she returned, she set the cups down carefully, steam rising between us. She sat across the small table, her hands wrapping around the warmth of her mug. The lamplight softened the lines of her face, casting her in a glow that made it difficult to look away. For a moment, we said nothing. Just the sound of the rain against the windows and the faint hum of the lamp. Her eyes met mine across the table, steady, unguarded. And then her hand, resting lightly on the table, shifted closer to mine. "Not much. just enough that the space between us suddenly felt like it had shrunk. I didn't move at first. I wasn't sure if she even realized what she was doing. But when my fingers twitched, brushing hers lightly, she didn't pull away. The touch was fleeting, a spark more than a flame, but it was enough to send a warmth through me that no tea could match. She drew in a quiet breath, her eyes flicking down to our hands before retreating back to her cup. The spell broke, but the air remained charged, heavy with something unspoken. We talked then, but about small things, the rain, the week, the kind of conversations that filled space without revealing too much. Yet beneath every word, that touch lingered, carrying more meaning than anything we said out loud. By the time the rain slowed, either of us seemed in a hurry for me to leave. Some evenings feel heavier than others, and I could tell the moment I saw her that night that she was carrying more than she wanted anyone to notice. Her posture was the same, straight, elegant, composed, but there was something in her eyes, a kind of tiredness that didn't come from the day alone. She invited me in casually, the way she always did now, as though it had become natural for me to be around. We settled in her living room, the warm glow of a lamp between us. The room smelled faintly of vanilla and the rain that still clung to the air outside. At first, we talked about simple things, her work, the weather, a movie she'd seen recently. But then, almost without warning, the conversation drifted somewhere quieter, somewhere heavier. She hesitated before speaking, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass in slow circles. "You know," she said softly, her voice different, fragile in a way I wasn't used to hearing from her. "Sometimes it feels like I've built my whole life on being strong. On never letting anyone see when things hurt." I didn't say anything. I just let her speak, because I could tell she needed the space more than she needed advice. She looked down, her hair falling slightly forward, and for the first time, I saw past the confident neighbor everyone else knew. I saw the woman who carried scars she rarely showed. "There were years," she continued, "when I thought if I let anyone close, it would only end with me being left behind. So I stopped letting people close at all." Her voice wavered, just enough to catch in my chest. And in that moment, I couldn't stand the distance between us, not when she was opening a door she usually kept locked tight. I reached out slowly, not wanting to startle her. My hand rested gently over hers, warm against the cool glass she was holding. For a second, I thought she might pull away. But she didn't. She just looked at me, her eyes searching mine, and in that quiet exchange, more was said than either of us could put into words. The silence stretched. Her breathing slowed, steadying, as though my touch had anchored her. I wanted to say something to let her know she wasn't alone, that I wasn't going anywhere, but the words felt too heavy for the moment. So instead, I just stayed there, present, my thumb brushing lightly against the back of her hand. It was such a small gesture, but the way her shoulders softened told me it mattered more than I realized. After a while, she pulled back, not abruptly, but gently, as if reminding herself where the boundaries were. She smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes, and steered the conversation towards safer ground. I let her. I didn't push. But even as we spoke about lighter things, I knew something had shifted between us. She had let me see her in a way she didn't show to the world. And I knew, deep down, that no matter how much she tried to cover it with small talk, that moment, the feel of her hand beneath mine, would stay with both of us. When I left that evening, the air outside was cooler, the rain finally gone. But inside me, something lingered, something heavier than the weather. For the first time, I realized how much it meant to her to have someone simply stay. And for the first time, I realized how much it meant to me to be that person. The night felt unusually still, the kind of quiet that makes every sound carry farther than it should. We had been walking for a while, not really going anywhere in particular, just letting the cool air and the rhythm of our steps fill the space between us. She walked beside me, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, the faint glow of the street lamps catching the curve of her profile. Every so often, her shoulder brushed against mine, never intentional, but never pulled back either. When we reached the corner of the street, we slowed beneath one of the lamps. The light spilled down over us, soft and golden, casting her in a way that made it impossible not to stare. She noticed, of course. She always did. She gave a small smile, tilting her head slightly. You really are always around, aren't you? Her words were light, but her tone wasn't. There was something deeper there, something testing the waters. I could have joked, could have played along like it was nothing. But the truth rose up in me, too strong to keep down. I looked at her and said quietly, Because you want me to be. The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. Her smile faltered, just slightly. Her eyes searched mine, like she was trying to decide if I meant it. And then the silence closed in around us, thick with all the things neither of us had dared to say. She took a small step closer, so close that I could see the way her breath rose and fell, the faint glimmer in her eyes as she looked up at me. My heart pounded hard against my ribs, every instinct urging me to close the gap, to say out loud what I'd only been feeling in silence. For a moment, I thought she might. Her lips parted, her gaze lingering on mine longer than it ever had before. The space between us felt like it was shrinking, drawn together by something neither of us could pretend wasn't there. But then, she pulled back, just slightly, enough to remind us both of the line she wasn't ready to cross. She shook her head, almost imperceptibly, and whispered, We can't, you know what people would think. Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying more than she wanted it to. I swallowed hard, the ache in my chest almost unbearable. I wanted to tell her it didn't matter, that the world outside this quiet street didn't matter, that the only thing that mattered was the way she was looking at me right now. But I didn't. Because I could see in her eyes that she wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, I just nodded, keeping my voice steady even as everything inside me churned. I know. We stood there in silence, the street lamp buzzing faintly above us, the night pressing close. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from something heavier. And all I could do was stand there, wanting to reach out, but knowing she needed the space to hold herself together. Finally, she gave me a small smile, soft, almost apologetic, and said, Thank you, for understanding. I forced a smile of my own, though it felt tight, unfinished. Always. As we turned to walk back, the air between us felt charged, fragile, like glass stretched thin. The closeness we'd almost touched lingered, a memory of something that hadn't happened but still lived inside us both. And though nothing more had been said, I knew the truth. She wanted me near, even if she couldn't admit it out loud. And I wanted her more than ever, even if it meant walking the rest of the night with words caught in my throat. The days after that night beneath the street lamp felt different. At first, I didn't think much of it. Neighbors had busy lives, schedules that didn't always line up. But soon, I realized it wasn't coincidence. She was avoiding me. Her curtains stayed drawn more often. Where we used to cross paths by chance, now there was only distance. No small smiles on the porch. No shared words over groceries. Just silence, and the unsettling feeling that I had pushed too close to something she wasn't ready to face. I told myself to give her space, but every hour of distance pressed heavier on me. The memory of her eyes that night, the way they had almost leaned toward mine, wouldn't let me rest. Finally, after days of waiting, I couldn't take it anymore. I found myself at her door, heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. For a long moment, nothing happened after I knocked. I nearly turned away, telling myself to let it go. But then the door opened, slowly, and there she was. She didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked conflicted, as though she had been expecting this but hadn't decided what to do about it. Her voice was soft, uneven when she finally spoke. You make it too easy to forget myself. The words cut through me, quiet but loaded. I held her gaze, searching her eyes, seeing the storm she was trying to contain. She wasn't talking about something small. She was talking about the way being near me made her let go of all the walls she'd spent years building. I stepped closer, though careful not to cross into her space without permission. My voice was low, steady, but inside I was trembling. I don't want you to forget yourself. I just want you to feel seen. As you are. Right now. Her breath caught, just enough for me to notice. Her hand rested against the doorframe, fingers tightening slightly, as though she needed the wood to steady herself. The silence stretched between us, thick with everything neither of us had said. The street outside was quiet, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves in the night breeze. It felt as if the whole world had narrowed to just this doorway, this fragile distance between us. "I can't," she began, her voice breaking. Then she stopped, shaking her head. Her eyes glistened in the dim light, and I saw her wrestle with herself, between what she wanted and what she believed she should resist. I wanted to reach for her, to take her hand the way I had before, to let her know she wasn't alone in that battle. But I held myself back, afraid that pushing too far would only send her retreating again. Instead, I let the words carry what my hands couldn't. "You don't have to decide anything tonight. I just need you to know, I'm here. Not because you need me. Not because you can't do this on your own. But because I want to be." Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to argue, but no words came. She just stood there, caught between resistance and the undeniable truth of what was building between us. Finally, after what felt like forever, she whispered, "Why do you make it so hard to say no to you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The way her voice trembled told me she already knew. And though she didn't step closer that night, though no promises were spoken, the walls between us had cracked even deeper. Enough for both of us to feel the truth pressing through. As I walked back to my porch, the night felt alive, humming with the weight of what had just passed. We were standing on the edge of something neither of us could undo. The night I finally understood her came quietly, without warning. No storm, no heavy air. Just a calm stillness that felt like the world had paused long enough to let us breathe. I hadn't planned on seeing her that evening, but there she was, standing outside her house, her arms folded loosely as though she'd been waiting. The porch light glowed faintly behind her, framing her silhouette, and for a moment, I thought she looked almost fragile, though I knew she hated that word. When our eyes met, neither of us said anything at first. I walked toward her slowly, the gravel crunching under my steps, and stopped just close enough that I could see the tiny reflections of light in her eyes. "You always show up," she said softly, almost accusing, but her voice carried no anger. Only something deeper. Something she didn't want to admit was relief. "Because you want me to," I answered, the words steady this time, no hesitation, no second guessing. Her breath caught. She looked down, then back up at me, as though weighing the risk of what she was about to do. And then, almost cautiously, she stepped closer. Just a few inches, but enough for me to feel the warmth of her presence. Her hand rose, hesitating in the air before resting gently against my chest. The touch was light, tentative, but it sent a rush through me all the same. I could feel her fingers tremble faintly, the hesitation of someone who wasn't used to reaching out, who wasn't used to letting herself want. "I shouldn't," she whispered, though her hand didn't move. "This isn't simple. It never will be." "I know," I said. My voice was quiet, steady, carrying the truth I had been holding for weeks. "But that doesn't change what's here. Between us." Her eyes searched mine, looking for something, certainty, maybe, or permission to let herself fall. The silence stretched, and then, instead of pulling away, she leaned in slowly, pressing her forehead gently against mine. The world seemed to dissolve in that moment. There was no street, no porch light, no weight of judgment or fear. Just her breath mingling with mine, the faintest brush of her hair against my cheek, and the quiet admission in the way she let herself linger there. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The intimacy was in the closeness itself, in the unspoken promise that she had finally stopped running from what she felt. Her hand stayed against my chest, her thumb brushing lightly once before she let it rest still. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of her touch settle into me, memorizing every detail of the moment. After what felt like forever, she exhaled softly, pulling back just enough to meet my eyes again. Her expression carried both relief and uncertainty, as though she had finally admitted the truth but didn't know where it would lead. "I don't know if I can give you what you deserve," she said quietly. I shook my head, a small smile tugging at my lips. I'm not asking for promises. Just honesty. Just this. Her lips curved, faint but real, the closest thing to surrender I'd seen from her. And in that fragile smile, I understood that whatever the future held, this moment was enough. We stood there a little longer, the night cool around us, the porch light casting a soft halo above. Two people caught between uncertainty and hope, choosing not to run from it anymore. When I finally turned to leave, she didn't stop me. But her voice followed, low and certain. Don't stop showing up. I glanced back, meeting her eyes one last time, and gave the only answer that felt right. Never. And with that, the story wasn't over. Not finished, not sealed. But for the first time, it felt real. 11L.